Well, our special guest on Left, Right and Centre tonight is writer and author Fatima Bhutto. Already the author of 4 books, Fatima Bhutto is now out with her latest novel called The Runaways, which looks at the complex issue of Muslim identity in a very complex world that we all currently live in. It looks at the lives of 3 key protagonists in Karachi, in the UK, as well as in Mosul. And it's great to have Ms. Bhutto joining us on NDTV today. Many congratulations, Fatima Bhutto, on the book. It's a terrific read, and I don't want to give away the plot, but it looks at these issues of faith, of Muslim identity, of radicalization. You grew up in Syria. You were studying in the West when 9/11 happened, when 7/7 happened in London. How much of this book was shaped by what you saw in the aftermath of those incidents?
Thank you, Nidhi, for having me. It's great to be with you on the program. I think it does something a little wider, actually, than just talk about Muslim identity. It's really about millennial identity and the confusions of millennial identity, but set against a backdrop of extreme disorder and inequality. As you said, I was in university in New York when 9/11 happened, and I was studying in London when 7/7 happened. And like many young people, I've come of age against this backdrop and trying to understand where one fits into the world, how one identifies oneself, in opposition to violence. And also amidst all the confusion was really what got me thinking about The Runaways. And I think it's not just young Pakistanis or young Muslims who are grappling with that. I think we see it all over the globe today.
I remember as a reporter covering the London bombings when they happened, and I also remember the huge backlash that the Muslims, as the Muslim community faced in England at the time. And in London, I remember there were, young Muslim men distributing free pamphlets to people to try to make them understand that this is what Islam actually stands for. You're misunderstanding us. And there were lots of folks who were arguing with them, saying stuff like, you cage your women in the parda and, stuff like that. A lot of arguments happening. But is that a burden you think that Muslims are still carrying, even after these big attacks? And I mean, in London or in England in particular, is that a burden that they still carry, trying to explain what Islam really stands for, trying to explain what their religion stands for?
Well, my experience of it was really different, actually, because when I was in London, I remember I was studying at SOAS at the time, and living near King's Cross, where one of the attacks happened. And I remember people standing on the road with maps. They were young, they seemed like young Muslim men, and they were distributing maps so that people knew how to walk home. When I was in New York after 9/11, I remember a lot of people being afraid, and many people saying, don't say where you're from, and don't tell people your name and things like that. But actually, whenever people found out that you were a foreigner, they were so kind and they were so concerned and compassionate. So my memory of those traumatic incidents was really of people's kindness, of people reaching out and being able to connect with other people and not being restricted. But I think if one looks at the news today, everyone everywhere seems to be trying to place themselves in opposition, in a way, to the news, in opposition to some kind of politics. And it's not just Muslims. I think we see that with a lot of people, young people in America. We see that with minorities in Europe. We see that with migrants. And it's a confusing time, I think, especially with the culture of social media, which requires everybody to be themselves, whatever that is, on a public platform all the time. How do you decide who you are when who you are is always changing?
That's an interesting way to look at it. In fact, you're yourself not a very keen user of social media, are you? It's interesting. And why is that?
Well, I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter, because I think at its core, it's an interesting way of sharing information and hearing information from other people. But, it's become so murky in the past few years. It's become a platform for a lot of aggression and a lot of hate. Instagram, I mean, I don't really understand what its redeeming qualities are, because it's basically just people competing with each other, and this terrible narcissistic one-upmanship. And like Facebook, I really want nothing to do with ever. So, we have to use these mediums, but I think these mediums are changing the culture in such a destructive way. They're changing how we tell stories. They're changing how we connect to people. They're changing our view of memory and of what our lives are like.
I think that's
so yeah, I'm a little bit of an old fogey with social media.
Yeah, and I hear you, because I recently quit Facebook. I barely Instagram, and well, Twitter is an occupational hazard. But since we're talking about the issues of Muslim identity, how do you see, for instance, the debate around the hijab in Europe currently? It seems that everybody seems to have an opinion on this, except no one's asking women what they think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Nidhi. I think, everyone wants to tell Muslim women what to wear, and nobody really wants to ask them what they'd like to do. And I think if you believe in the idea of feminism as being a woman's right to choose, then that has to apply to everything. That has to apply to whether she would like to cover or not like to cover. And my opinion is no one has any right to tell any woman what to wear or what not to wear. And it's funny, sometimes I get asked about this question, and I always wonder why people are not asking women who wear hijabs. But the debate's always being had, for example, in Europe at least, by Europeans, by people that don't wear hijabs. And it's really not up to them what other people wear.
Well, you've, of course, been writing since you were a teenager. Your first book of poems was published when you were just 12 years old, because your father encouraged you to do that. And in fact, you chose to not actively dive into politics, but use your writing as a way to express your political views. And is that something you stand by? I mean, is that a very conscious choice that you made, to not stand for office, but use your writing as the sort of tool with which to express your views?
Yes, thankfully I wasn't 12 when the book was published. I was 15. I mean, I had started writing those poems at a young age, but I always wanted to be a writer, because I was always interested in people, and I was interested in people's stories and the quiet side of what people experience, their joys, their sorrows, their suffering. And I was encouraged from a young age by my father to write and to read a lot. And so I'm doing the job I always wanted to do. And I don't think it's divorced from politics. I think a lot of what I write is quite political, but this is just the way in which I choose to express that side. And yeah, I stand by it. I'm quite happy doing what I do and having the freedom to say what I think and what I feel.
You were, of course, very close to your father. You were a teenager when he was killed. How did that change you? It's a life-changing experience for any young girl. But how did that personally change you, and the way you just looked at life, and the way you began to write later?
Well, I was very, very close to my father, because he raised me as a single parent. And having a father raise you as a young girl, and having a father who believed that actually there was no limit to what you could do, that just because you were a girl didn't change the possibilities of the world for you, was and still remains for me very empowering and very important. And losing him was a very painful experience, not only to lose someone who was a father and a protector, but a friend. But also the violence with which he was killed was very painful, and still is. I don't think you ever get over that, and I certainly never have. But what it has done is it's caused me to be, I hope at least, more sympathetic, to try and be more compassionate, to try and be more sensitive to the violence and the grief and a lot of the sorrow around me, to see that what happened to me is not really unique. It happens everywhere. And to try to connect to those other orbits and be a solace if I can. And if I can't, then at least just to observe and to understand how it is that people survive pain. And that's really what the Runaways is about in a lot of ways.
That's actually true. Let's talk a bit about what's happening in Pakistan at the moment. You've been scathing in your criticism of Imran Khan. You wrote in one of your columns that he's a clown in a circus run by the army. Why do you think so?
Well, you know, I think if you're looking at Pakistan today, especially as a young Pakistani, we are such a young country. We have so many hopes for what the country should be and how it should treat its people. And I think we are watching very worrying censorship. We have cases of a lot of fear and intimidation. And unfortunately, I don't really see that this government is taking any steps to reverse that. If anything, it's furthering that.
You had also written in that same column about how Nawaz Sharif was once feted by the army and then hunted down and jailed. What do you foresee for Imran Khan then?
Well, Nidhi, the lesson of Pakistan is that one really can never foresee anything. Everyone is watching and waiting to see what happens. And of course, I think Pakistan is an incredibly hopeful country if one is looking at its people, if one looks at the aspirations and the dreams and the longings of its people. But, if we're looking at the politics, then I'm not sure you see the same picture. But again, I don't think that's terribly unique to Pakistan. I think that's pretty widespread at the moment. If you're a young person watching politics anywhere, it's difficult to see how the internet, news, social media, trolls, how they're impacting the conversation.
Your view of Imran Khan is actually shared by many in India, even the government, which sees him as the quote-unquote puppet of the army. What do you think, just from your point of view, that would mean for the India-Pakistan relationship, which is again going through a pretty terrible phase?
Well, I don't know. I mean, my criticism of Imran Khan's politics really, have always been that I really don't see a conversation about women in his politics. I don't see a conversation that empowers the provinces of Pakistan in his conversation. And I see a lot of opportunism in it. It's difficult to predict what it means for the India-Pakistan relationship, again, because we have two totally separate ways of looking at it. If you talk to Indians or Pakistanis on the street, normal, young people, I think we all want the same thing. We want peace. We want to be able to connect, to talk to each other, to share experiences, because we are the same people at core. But if you look at how politics addresses that, then of course you have a grimmer picture, unfortunately.
What did you think of Bilawal's campaign, if I could ask you, as he made his political sort of debut in these elections?
I don't really like to comment on him. He's a young man and he's been through a great trauma and a lot of violence, and I hope he'll be well. I wish him only well as a person. I prefer not really to comment on the politics of it all.
Well, I know you often get asked about dynasty politics in South Asia. God knows we certainly have it across India. But how do you see this phenomenon?
Well, I think it depends. I think, in India, you certainly have your elections run every 5 years. You have state elections all the time. And so people have the right to choose their representatives. So in that case, it's a different situation, I think, than Pakistan, where there really isn't the same degree of transparency, maybe, when it comes to choosing people. It's a narrower field. I mean, I always get asked about dynasty because people just assume that being born into a political family, automatically you must want to do it. And I don't think that's true. I think politics is a service. And those who join it because they wish to partake in that service. I choose to do my service in another way. I choose to do it through my writing and through my books. But so long as people have the right to choose, then they shouldn't really have limits on their choices, I don't think.
Well, Fatima Bhutto, it was wonderful to talk to you. Your book, The Runaways, your latest novel, as I said, it is a terrific read, and I would encourage everyone to go out and get it. Thank you so much for speaking to us on NDTV today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nidhi.